Welcome, I'm your host Brian Buckmeyer here at the Law&Crime Trial Network this afternoon. In the case of Amber Guyger, the conclusion has come, and we've seen some controversy where the judge is giving the defendant a hug afterwards, also giving commentary about God, forgiveness, and handing her her own personal Bible. She also, of course, hugged the defendant's family, giving their consoling and saying that God will help in many ways. Now, we are joined here with Andrew Seidel from the Freedom from Religion Foundation.
Sure.
Now, Andrew, can you give our viewers a little bit of background as to the foundation in which you work for and also the complaint that you filed against the judge?
Sure. So FFRF exists to keep state and church separate and to educate the public about what it is to be a non-believer in the United States. And basically what happened yesterday at the conclusion of the trial, it appears that the judge kind of got caught up and swept up in the emotion of the trial. Eventually went back to her chambers, grabbed her Bible, came back out, gave it to Amber Guyger, instructed her on how to read it, told her to read the Gospels, to read John 3:16, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son, and really had this intense moment of proselytizing and witnessing to not just the defendant, but everybody really who was in that courtroom. As you can see, she's in her robes. There are armed guards standing there. It is happening in the courtroom. So she's acting in her official capacity as a judge, and she is promoting her personal religion. So she's abusing an office that belongs to we the people to promote her personal religion. And that was the real problem for us.
So I would agree with you and all those points. I don't think anyone can really argue as to what was seen. Those are all factual there. And please excuse the pun. I've got to play devil's advocate to some extent here. I guess
Sure.
the major question is, what's the harm?
Well, the harm is that it violates the First Amendment of the Constitution, right? And there is no such thing as a government, there is no such thing as the freedom of religion without a government that is free from religion. And when a judge can use their office to impose their religion on citizens, that principle is violated, and everybody's religious liberty is trampled upon. And, I think a lot of people who don't have a problem with this might have a better understanding if this judge happened to not be Christian. If this had been a Muslim judge handing out a Quran and instructing the defendant to follow Allah and worship Allah, I think people might have a better understanding of why this was so problematic.
I think that's a great point. Also, when you start looking at it from different religious perspectives, obviously people maybe from Dallas or from the area or abroad and say, hey, I'm religious, I'm Catholic, I don't see a problem with this. And again, a little bit of pushback, I'm not saying you're wrong. The one question that I had was, in her own testimony, she invoked God, and I think in some of the impact statements, there was also a conversation of she was not religious to begin with. And I think if the conversation started there, Andrew, even myself as a Roman Catholic, I would have been all with you. I said, hey, if she's not religious, it's religion, I believe, fundamentally should be personal. You shouldn't be pushing it on anyone, regardless if you have a robe or not. But then I guess the question becomes is, if Amber Guyger and her family are saying, hey, I wasn't religious, but I found God, and now I'm moving towards God, where is, I guess, and again, it's the harm, but I know you've already articulated it. If she is invoking God herself, and this is just maybe a moment where I agree, 100%, the judge lost herself a little, she's coming and saying, hey, you know what? You're finding God, I found God. Maybe this is a personal conversation I can have with you that might help you to get to where you yourself want to go. Is it the conversation that's the issue for you? Or is it the fact that where it happened, who did it, and why it occurred?
It's the latter, right? Really, Amber Guyger's personal religion is irrelevant to the constitutional question. This was a judge using a public office to promote her personal religion and have that conversation. Again, there were armed guards standing nearby. If the judge had really wanted to do this and it was important to her, the calculus would change if, for instance, she went to visit Amber Guyger at the jail on a weekend, didn't use her special status as a judge to get, for instance, special influence at the jail to be able to spend more time with her, things like that. There's a way that she could probably have this conversation with Amber Guyger, but this was not the way to do it. This, in the courtroom with the armed guard standing by in her official judicial uniform, that absolutely crossed the line. And that's the problem. It's not, the issue is not what Amber Guyger personally believes. It's that the judge is using a public office to promote her personal religion. That's the problem.
I hear you. Now, when we're talking about public office, especially the judicial branch, I mean, again, a little bit of pushback. I practice in Brooklyn, and I think that you and I would have the same reaction when we go to a Brooklyn court, and right above the judge says, "In God we trust." I went to school in Virginia, a lot more of that in Virginia, and I'm pretty sure you probably know more places as well where the word God and the name God is invoked throughout all the court systems. So is it just that the history of religion in this country and the judicial system is so intertwined that they cannot be pulled apart?
Well, I mean, I don't think there's as much of a history as people like to think. I mean, "In God We Trust" wasn't adopted as the national motto until the 1950s. I've got a whole chapter in my book about this, the founding myth, why Christian nationalism is un-American. But really, again, the central point that I think you're trying to make, that there is this element of religion in our judicial system, I think that fails. And it's not, we're not saying that judges and defendants and citizens can't have a personal religion and that they can't exercise that personal religion. You know, Judge Kemp is free to do that when she is Mrs. Kemp on the weekend or after work. But when she dons that robe and dons the power of the state and has the imprimatur of the state and all that power, that changes. And then she's not exercising her personal religion. Then she's wielding government power, and she can't use that in a way to advance any religion.
So would it be fair to say that you believe that Miss or Mrs., I'm not sure what her marital status is, can use religion, but Judge Kemp cannot in her official capacity?
Exactly. And we have to draw that distinction between acting in her personal capacity as a citizen and acting in her official capacity as a judge overseeing a criminal trial, right? And we have to remember, too, this trial wasn't really over. I mean, the sentencing had been handed down, but there's going to be motions for reconsideration that are going to be done. It's certainly going to be appealed, I would think. And it's not just this moment, but if you are an attorney in this judge's courtroom, you are going to show this video to your clients. And you're going to say, look, this judge cares about notions of Christian reform and Christian forgiveness. And if you can play to that, you might get a better deal or you might get a more favorable ruling. She has compromised the impartiality of her courtroom by doing this.
Yeah, I definitely jump on that one. The bias of having one religion being favored over another is definitely, I think, someone, especially in the example you've given, that I think people will be jarred with a little bit here and there. I guess the other question I would have is, what are you seeking here? What is the redress in which you would want from the complaint that you filed?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, you know, we do recognize, there's two things I want to point out. We recognize that this was a really highly emotional trial and that the judge did, by and large, from what we can tell, a pretty good job throughout the trial and handled it with grace and aplomb. It seems that she just got caught up in the emotion of that moment there at the end. And we understand that. But we do want the Judicial Commission to investigate this and to educate the judge about why it crossed the line and work to ensure that it doesn't happen again. And the second thing that I'd like to point out, too, is, you know, I think our criminal justice system could benefit from a lot more compassion. I think the system is broken, and an injection of compassion, especially into some of our sentencing laws, could be very, very helpful. But that need is not an excuse to violate the First Amendment of the Constitution, even if you are caught up in the emotion of the moment. We hold our judges to a higher standard for a very good reason.
I would agree. So final question for you then. If you were, I'm gonna give you a judicial or some legislative power here for a minute. If you had the legislative ability to write the parameters for what you would want to see from judges and giving that compassion in a very secular or non-religious way, what would that legislative body look like?
Oh, I mean, I'm certainly not the expert in overhauling our criminal justice system. I do think it needs an overhaul. The place that I would start would be with the new Jim Crow and use that as sort of my guidebook to overhauling our criminal justice system in a very real and impactful way, and one that, again, doesn't require religion. You know, I'm getting a lot of blowback on Twitter about this, and people are saying, you know, you can't be compassionate without Jesus, you can't be compassionate without being a Christian, and I think that that's absolutely untrue, right? It is our shared humanity is what makes us compassionate, and what drives us to compassion. And that is what we need to hold on to here. And you don't need religion for that. You certainly don't need to inject it into a government courtroom.
Yeah. Andrew, I want to thank you very much for joining us here today. Great insight, great points. And I think that this will definitely help give credence to your argument and hopefully show people how you can interject compassion, as you were saying, without interjecting religion. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Oh, it was my pleasure. Thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it, Brian.
Not a problem.